Welcome. I am Dr. Jesse Ehrenfeld. I'm the immediate past president of the American Medical Association, and I'm so delighted to kick off the fourth webinar series from the World Medical Association's Medical Technology Group. This is our series on artificial intelligence in medicine, and I'm so delighted to be co-hosting this series with Dr. Jacob Matthew from the Kuwait Medical Association. Today, we have a really, really exciting session on understanding the next phase of what are best practices in medical AI development. And we are really, really wonderful to have Dr. Nathalie Bloch join us today. Dr. Bloch is a distinguished physician, an international leader, an innovator who is currently a senior advisor for the National Program for Bioconvergence at the Israeli Innovation Authority. She's somebody who's recognized globally for her leadership in digital health, artificial intelligence, healthcare across the world. She was the founder and director of the Innovation Center for Digital Health at Sheba Medical Center in Israel, where she continues to spearhead many initiatives to integrate cutting-edge technologies, including AI in medicine, into clinical practice. All of her work has really significantly contributed to important outcomes improvements, reducing hospital readmissions, enhancing patient care. In addition to her strategic role at Sheba Medical Center, Dr. Bloch leads an educational practice-based innovation and entrepreneurship program for trainees at the Israeli Medical Association. She's going to tell us a little bit about that today. So I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Bloch. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to have a great session today.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm happy to join you for this amazing webinars. I will share with you a little bit about my experience as it has been evolving throughout the years. And I started to deal with technologies since 2012 when I became a medical director in Boston in one of the IPAs associated with the Harvard Medical School. And at that time, we needed to really establish a population management practice. When I understood that I won't be able to do it without technologies, what we started with was really using an application to keep patients with congestive heart failure at home as much as we can. And I remember that at that time, this was before the COVID time, I had to go 6 times to the IRB committee in order to be able to bring in one technology to use it. This is just to show how much we have progressed in the last decade and a little bit more, of course, from that time. When I started this Innovation Center at Sheba in 2017, there was no generative AI. We only had machine learning technology, and each technology had to use thousands and even more than thousands of data resources in order to be able to prove one specific algorithm that can change either quality, measurement, or efficiency, and so on. Since the generative AI started about 2 years ago, things are completely different. And I'm happy to elaborate more once we go through the discussion. Just wanted to give a short brief of what I've been done in the last 15 years in technology and specifically AI.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloch, for that introduction, and your expertise speaks volumes. What is really amazing is the fact that as a clinician, you've been able to really penetrate the development aspect of developing these AI tools and how we as physicians can be part of the entire process. So as we start this session, the first part, what we're looking at is from concept to clinic. So how medical tools, AI tools are created from the ideation stage, identifying the pain points, all the way to deployment. So could you tell us a bit more about what you do when it comes to the ideation stage? Like when you've identified a few pain points, how do you sift through them and see, okay, these are some things worth taking forward, some things that are not. What's your process like?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you can divide this question into two. Either I'm the entrepreneur and this is one way, or I'm the actually hospital or healthcare organization that I need to look into a new technology that I bring in. And let me start with this one, because most of us are clinicians, and how do we look at our needs and pinpoints what type of technologies we consider in order to do that, right? So for example, when I was at Chiba, one of the things, and the AI started mostly in clinical work with imaging. So it was easier to start with imaging because most of the data is in the digital technology already, right? And when you look at the electronic medical records, it's different. So with the imagings, for example, I remember when AI Doc, which is actually one of the leading companies in radiology, AI, they created algorithm to detect brain hemorrhage. And the idea was to see how radiologists will really use it. That's where I came into play. Like, how am I going to convince the radiologist to use an algorithm that can really change the way that they practice? And it's mostly workflow to shorten the time that it will take to identify an hemorrhage and so on. And the idea was really to bring it to embed the algorithm into their workflow. Whenever something came up abnormal, a CT scan was abnormal, it jumped up to be the first one in the list from I don't know, dozens of CTs that were done that evening in the ER, for example. The abnormal one came up and it was marked in a different color, and it was clear to them that this CT is abnormal. The following morning, all the radiologists wanted to have this, the algorithms embedded in their own private computers. So that's how you really want to integrate them and to understand how a problem is actually become a technology that is integrated. If you ask me as an entrepreneur how to develop a concept into a technology, then it's a different answer, right? Like, then, for my opinion, the way I do it, I use a lot the system of design thinking. When you think about the problem, you really want to interview and to watch the people that you want to serve, the customer that you want to serve. So if I'm developing now a company that is actually trying to do a summary of all the medical documents into a layperson language, then what are the needs in the clinics? What type of doctors need it, and why would they need it? Do they want in order to create reports for patients, or do they want it in order to create data for a malpractice lawsuit? It depends. And each one of them has different needs, and only when you understand really how the work is done in the field, like I go to practices and really see what type of problems they have, how much time does it take to a physician to write a report, who are the other people that are involved in writing the report. So you really want to understand who are the stakeholders, interview them, go through the process by yourself, like to understand the real pain point, and then, find the right technology. Is it Gen AI? What do I need to add to the Gen AI in order for that to be precise with minimal hallucinations and so on?
Dr. Bloch, so as you are having those conversations and you're out there in clinical settings, talking to physicians, understanding the workflows, obviously there are many different approaches, right, to how care delivery systems are organized. And as you think about, ultimately building a product that is generalizable, that meets the needs of many different clinics, systems of physicians, how do you balance sort of the individual requests that you might hear or see in one area versus tools and products that are generalizable and can integrate across many settings? And I think we have this problem even for sort of local systems that are trying to prioritize user requests that stack up. There may be thousands of help desk tickets for user enhancements. Companies deal with the same sort of challenge at the front end of trying to develop a technology. What's a good approach to thinking about that?
Yeah, I don't think that I have a magic answer for that. It's like in steps. So first of all, clinical problems are the same everywhere. So it doesn't really matter if you're in one country or another, even in one state or another. So clinical problems are just more or less the same. The problem is really the admin behind it, the workflow. Each clinic might work differently. But then, once you really want to find the minimal thing that you need to do in order for a product to be able to enter to a new surrounding. And yes, sometimes you will need to tweaks and change things as you go. That's the beauty in serving people, right, and serving different applications. But you're in the right way when you know that your skeleton, that the basic is really good for most of the cases. That's
That-
how I feel.
No, that's very helpful. And, in the process when we are looking at developing solutions, and now with all of the various tools that are at hand, is there any specific interview process or information or discovery stage that you use when identifying, okay, say this is a significant, like you said, clinical problems are the same everywhere, but some might be used by very specialized people. Maybe it might not in a handful versus, like, as Jesse said, a whole generalizable, more population fit tool. So is there any specific stakeholder interviews, mapping? Who do you identify? Who do you speak to? And even like if it's a patient facing platform, do you get the patients involved in the design process as well?
Yeah, of course. So I think that I'll start with an example and it will look clearer. So when I became a medical director in Boston, my role was to enhance, and this is like a generalized problem, to enhance communication between the hospitalist in the hospital and the primary care physician outside of the hospital. This was the question. And once I had a team, and we really mapped who are the stakeholders that are involved with inpatient and outpatient communication. The hospital said, just create a newsletter and some meetings, events, and this will increase the communication, which is, as we know, this is maybe one way, but that's not a real issue. And once we start talking, so how do I recognize? I said, I will interview the hospitalists and the nurses there and the people who are in charge of the front desk and also in the clinics. We had about 12 to 15 stakeholders that we interviewed and watched them. So watching also the workflow of days, how do they communicate with the primary care physicians? And we concluded that the problem is not just communication. The problem was that the physicians were upset about the discharge patients that they didn't know about them. The primary care we didn't know. So this was actually only about let's solve the discharge process. And once we understood, so once you do these whole interviews and watching your stakeholders, you understand where the problem is. When the problem was that, really, like, is it about discharge? Then we created a follow-up appointment immediately from the hospital to the outpatient services without even thinking twice. 93% of the patients arrived to this follow-up appointment. The rest is history. I mean, the readmissions went down by more than 12% within a month. So when you ask me, how do I do it? How do we do the process? This is a workflow. What I gave an example is a workflow. It's not a technology based on Gen AI, but this is like a way of trying to find a solution.
It seems like you spend a lot of your time translating the frustrations that we experience when we're working, delivering care into opportunities to provide solutions. But I think we all have experienced companies and entrepreneurs who have an innovation, a solution that they're then trying to figure out what problem can it solve. How do you make sure that the solution isn't driving the product per se, but really the needs and those frustrations and those opportunities to solve pain points are really at the center? Because sometimes it seems like it's backwards.
Yes, I totally agree. I totally agree that many times we have the technology and then they ask, okay, what kind of problem this can solve? And that's really, it's not the right way, right? Like to solve. But on the other hand, we did it, like, when you have a good technology that works in a different content, like, in defense, for example, as you might know, in Israel, there are many technologies that's started from the defense industry. Then you can really sometimes see how it can help with medicine, and I have an example for that. So I had a team who did they were able from images to see what is abnormal or what is different, the delta. They were able to see, like, if they saw a map of a specific place, they were able to show the difference, the changes over time. And when they took this technology and they came to me, and I said, okay, let's do it over pathology slides. Let's start to see if we can, or radiology, right? If we can see changes in the pattern of cells from one place to the other. We want mammogram. We did it with mammograms. This worked beautifully. We took mammograms all over the years of a specific woman. And if they can show a difference from 1 year to the other, then they don't really need to say this is this is a calcification and this is for sure so and so. But if you see just a difference from 1 year to the other, then it will bring up a physician intervention, and then we'll do more tests. So we took a technology that was totally outside of the medical care, and we brought it into something that was so obvious and needed.
Let me ask you another question just on the development side. So, I think globally we're struggling with trying to really understand how do we think about the evidence that should be required to bring a product in the marketplace. But there's an earlier piece which is around pilots, right? And so phased rollouts and user testing. So obviously, we want to practice evidence-based medicine. We want to know that these tools work. And there is no global standard right now. There's no standard in the US. I don't think there's a standard in Israel. There's certainly not consensus around the international medical device regulators, groups that we interact with in our various roles. How do you think about understanding the trustworthiness of a product or the usability of a tool in the early testing phase, linked then to kind of evidence generation and having certainty as you're doing pilot testing and validation that these tools are actually working the way that they say they're working?
Right. So that's a great question. I never passed a technology without the full process of going through the IRB application, having a real pilot and comparing the process with the technology and without, creating everything that is just like how a good study should look like. That's to begin with. This is the basic. I mean, I can't even think about trying to involve a technology with patient's care without going through the whole process of the IRB and running a good study. Later on, I mean, each technology, whenever you want really to implement it, I mean, it has to go through the FDA, right? I mean, you will never use a technology that it was not approved by the FDA. In order to get there, normally you need to have few hundreds of like patients that went through that. And then this is really up to the FDA. I remember that when we just started, it was just the beginning of FDA approval for AI in radiology. Now there are hundreds, if not thousands of algorithms that went through the FDA. Integrating the technology at the end of the day it's not easy. How to do it, I remember, like, I gave the example of AI doc. The other thing that I did is I fully digitalized the pathology department. This was a big thing, how to bring scanners and how to put a person who will scan the slides into the scanners every day. And then the pathologists themselves to understand really that they will get the alarms of an abnormal slide. This is a process that you really need to work with all the stakeholders that are involved in adapting this technology. But yes.
So you spoke about involving the stakeholders, and I think many times when a new solution is being rolled out, I sometimes feel there's this vicious circle where you're trying to go into deployment, trying to, okay, deliver something that you feel very passionate about, but the first question is, okay, how, has it been deployed? Have you done pilot? And they're like, you know, it's the chicken before the egg kind of thing. How
Yeah.
are we supposed to do something without going and do it safely? So how have you navigated that kind of aspect? Because it's not health technology, digital health solutions are not like many of the other solutions that are rolled out because patients and people are at the core of it. So how have you navigated that aspect of it?
Um, I think that once you do pilots in different organizations, like, 2 to 3 to 4 organizations, and you realize, because each organization, as you already mentioned before, has their own way, you can actually do implement one technology in different places, but there are some adaptations in each one of the organizations. So once you go through that, you understand, you get the experience. Those who ask you, who don't want to adopt it if you don't have experience, yeah, it's always a problem. So you start small. You start with the small ones that are hungrier, like, the big hospitals and healthcare clinics and organizations normally don't need new technologies, or at least they are more difficult to penetrate. But the smaller organizations are the ones that are very thankful for having a technology that can minimize their need to send patients outside to tertiary clinics and so on. But yes, it's definitely an issue. I mean, I've seen it with many startups that I work with.
So a lot of clinicians, they see problems and they love for technology to come and make their lives easier. And they'd like to interact with entrepreneurs or companies or share where they think there's a need. There are other clinicians who maybe are not so interested in really helping with the design and the innovation piece, but they want to know, all right, how do I evaluate a tool and know if it's going to actually work in my practice? What advice would you give to clinicians? And we have many who are going to watch this webinar, who are thinking, where do I even begin? Because you take any particular space, there may be 12 companies with 15 different products, and there's no necessarily clarity around how do you do evaluation. And while it'd be great to do long-term in situ pilots of different technologies, that's just not the reality, for really anybody anymore. And I'm curious, what advice would you give to our listeners about how they can engage in either of those processes?
Right. So there are two things. The generative AI, you can even use it by yourself, right? I mean, once people feel comfortable, they can use it. Once they understand what is prompt engineering is, they can use it. But let's talk about the product, because you both are talking mostly about real products that are already exist out there. I think that physicians can evaluate. So physicians have an amazing role in understanding technologies and implement it. Even though that we don't think so, we are the experts for our domain. And without physicians, you can't do anything, from my opinion, in bringing technology into healthcare. It's not, we have to be part of that. Not just in examining the product, but also in staying in the connection all the time of the human in the loop thing is a must. And the human in this case is really the physician. So first of all is, what is your pain point as a clinician? It depends if you're an oncologist or if you are a cardiologist or internal medicine or primary care. It doesn't really matter. You have a pain point because you know how you practice, you know how things are done in your hospital or whatever. And then once you know what your pain point is, then you have a few types of technologies to evaluate. And you say, okay, I don't know which one of them is the best. You really start going through the process of understanding what type of value, what are the matrices that this technology or this entrepreneur is actually saying that it will answer me. And it depends, right? I mean, yes, sometimes there will be a few technologies that can answer the same thing. So it doesn't really matter which one of them you will choose, but you want to choose the one that is easier to adopt, that you don't need, that you can integrate into your EMR in a smooth way, that it won't interfere with your workflow, because nobody wants really to have a few things to think about in every minute of our day work. And will reduce costs. And you know, I don't think that I have an answer of like from 10 technologies, which one you will use. But when you take into account the things that really bother you and you see how you can really integrate it in an easier way for you, this is good enough. This is good. I mean, there will all this era is so different. Like the AI changes so rapidly. Technologies that we adapted 5 years ago with machine learning are not relevant now with generative AI. So that's why I'm saying it's an evolving field that it's difficult to, if you're not on that all the time, it's difficult to keep the pace. But sometimes it's really just good enough for you in order to change things and getting the value from that.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're saying that, and I believe across the deployment from ideation, pain point identification to even the deployment, going to the market, releasing. I mean, every step needs clinician involvement, not just at the end for that stamp of approval or endorsement, but from the beginning through the design and the deployment life cycle. And I think, we're all quite active in the health technology aspect among us. But it would be, it's very straightforward for those of us who are attending as physicians. There's a straightforward path after medical school, okay, residency, and then following and work, and it's pretty straightforward in the clinical aspect. But when we look at the health technology, that kind of role, I think it's a bit unclear what's exactly the role of a clinician in this development stage and development area. I mean, so what are your thoughts on this? What are the key roles that clinicians can play here? Your experience in Israel, Dr. Bloch, Jesse, your experience in the U.S. as well.
I love this question because this is one of the things that I do mostly. How to make sure that physician will be always in the loop when a new technology is evolving, especially when it comes to my knowledge, right? And they ask me. Tech people, they are great. They have amazing ideas, but they don't really understand the complexity, the ethical, the relationship that we physicians have with patients and their families. They're not there. They didn't go through medical school. They're not there. And each technology can be amazing, but if you're not involving the physician from the beginning of how to create the technology itself and how to interact it and how to integrate it and what does it mean? I mean, I just finished now a big consultation program with a good company that does AI, and the CEO is not coming from healthcare, and he thinks that an encounter can be reduced to less than 1 minute if it's an easy encounter. But you know what? It's not the case. Because even if the case is only a simple UTI, but the patient's mother is sick and she has some mental issues and whatsoever, even a simple UTI will not last than 1 minute. So physicians need always to be in the loop when we create new technologies, not just towards the integration, but from the beginning on, and especially towards the integration, because creating it and putting it into the workflow of a doctor is also not a straightforward answer normally. So that's what I think.
I think there's also this issue around unintended consequences, right? Nobody understands the local workflow the way the people in that local workflow. And yes, I'm an anesthesiologist, and how we provide anesthesia services and anesthetize patients, it may look 80% the same across the world, but there are market differences in terms of who is providing certain tasks, how information is collected and documented, different pieces of equipment, and so there's a lot that the local environment will dictate around the nuances around care. And when you bring a technology into a workflow and you disrupt it, you change it, you modify it, hopefully you re-engineer it, there can be downstream consequences that may be unintended. And without really taking the time to understand what some of those consequences can be for patients, you can have all sorts of real challenges. And I think that's a really important role that physicians on the ground, who they may not be developers, they may not have any idea what a large language model is, but they can see when you try to replace 6 steps in a process, what that means for a patient, for the family, for the care team, for communication to those who are going to have to follow up in a care process. And I think that's a really important role for clinicians on the front line that they can play that may not be obvious.
You know, yeah, Jesse, when you said that, it triggered a kind of experience I had with a tech team that we were developing a solution. And I realized at the end of that discussion, they viewed us as clinicians as just data entry operators. We're just here to provide data points for them. And it kind of just took my breath away, because it's just so much more, as what both of you were describing as well. So how do you navigate these kind of discussions, Dr. Bloch, in a multidisciplinary team that, okay, we're used to working in a multidisciplinary team within healthcare, but everyone has healthcare related functions. But in a non healthcare team, how do you navigate working within such environments?
It's difficult. I totally am with you, and I get it. It's funny. I went through that personally, right? There are some companies that I couldn't work with because of that. Really, I had to step away because I felt they don't really understand. And I don't like to even to say I'm valuable. This is not, I will never say it, but they didn't really get it. What I try to say, that why it's important, yes, to listen to what the physicians say. And most of them, the ones that I had to leave because of that, they cannot be too successful, because at the end of the day, if they want to enter the medical world, they need to understand how physicians think and what their needs are. So yes, I hear you. And sometimes it won't work. If the entrepreneur who comes from the tech world is totally sure that he can do it without your advice, maybe they can do it on a very technology things, like, really, maybe images, they can do it differently, but not when it comes to workflow and clinical thinking.
Dr. Bloch, another issue that's kind of about cultural fit has to do with the pace of startups, right? And obviously, we all have this expectation that startups move quickly, they iterate, they're trying to get a minimum viable product, they're trying to shape features. And then, of course, healthcare institutions are 180 degrees away from that, right? We're very conservative. We have a focus on safety and reliability. So you obviously are at that interface, right, of entrepreneurship and innovation and sort of what I'll just call legacy healthcare institutions who have a very different mindset. How do you sort of create those worlds coming together in a harmonious fashion so that you can get the best of both?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's so harmonious, but what I did is I tried to look at the big picture and see what are the things that I can change. Things that are beyond me, then, that's it. That's life. Also in life, right? We have these issues. What are the things that I can change? So for example, the first thing that I did at Sheba is I took the 60 and above pages of contract between the hospital and companies, 60 and more. And I sat down with the legal advisor of the hospital. I didn't let her leave me for days until we changed them to 3 pages. 3 pages from 60. And I said, you cannot give a startup company a 60 pages contract and think that they will come and sign it with you, because just to pay the lawyer to go through these 60 pages will cost them, thousands of dollars, right? So one of the things that you need to do when you want to bridge between rapid involvement of a startup company and the slowness of a medical center is really to see what are the things that I can change. Maybe you can change the contract. Maybe you can change the way the time to design a pilot. You can design pilot by yourself and help the company to do it, right? And they won't have to, because companies are not really, if they don't have a medical advisor, they won't know how to do it. They don't know how to write a report for the IRB committee. And then you can I brought project managers to help the companies to do the pilots in the hospital. We had more than 80 projects at the same time with project managers. Yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, the hospital was very slow in approving. So the IRB was not easy to do. Only the COVID made it easier for me. The COVID actually changed everything because suddenly the IRB approved pilots in days instead of months. And money was not easy to bring in order to fund all those projects. But I worked with the Innovation Authority and I worked with external resources of money.
Just a note to the audience, we're going to go in the next couple of minutes to a session of Q&A. So please put out your questions. We'll be happy to answer them. We're awaiting your wonderful questions so that we can go deep into them, and don't hesitate. There's no such thing as a wrong question as well. So as we're going into this, and I really appreciate you, Dr. Bloch, for mentioning about the stand you took when you're discussing with these companies. Many times clinicians, we often enter these teams late. I think it's very important that we be assertive. Our contribution is a strong contribution that needs to be recognized. Not just, we tend to move away from saying, financial, but even within the financial aspect, your compensation, your authorship, the IP recognition. So, we're a co-creator within this future of healthcare as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you feel, Jesse? What's the state within the U.S.? Do you feel that the majority of health technology is driven by physician-led, or is it, business leaders, tech leaders in that sense?
Well, look, not enough of it is physician-led or heavily involves physicians. That's been a key priority of the American Medical Association to make sure that throughout design, deployment, development, monitoring, physicians are involved, because we've seen lots of technologies that have failed to deliver because they're disconnected, right, from what we understand as frontline clinicians. And so I think the theme that's coming back over and over and over is really making sure that the physician perspective, the understanding of the workflows is really at the center of the solution being developed, understood how the products are working, and then what the long-term implications are. But unfortunately, that's not often the case. I see companies that, they have a product, they're 80% done, and then they hire a physician as an advisor as sort of an afterthought. That is clearly not the approach that I think Dr. Bloch is describing with her innovation work. In fact, it couldn't be more different. But I think, unfortunately, I continue to see that happening. I think that's changing a little bit, particularly as capital is getting more difficult, and companies are really, there's if you have a data set in a developer, 5 years ago, you could get millions of dollars from venture. Now that's not really the case, and I think that the more sophisticated firms and investors understand the role of clinicians. But Dr. Bloch, I'd love to get your perspective on what you've seen, and maybe if that's shifted or not over the last few years.
Yeah, I don't know the data to see if it shifted, but I can tell you that one of the things that we established was really to bring in tech people that have no ideas, like no new pain points to address. And we created these meetings with physicians who come with pain points. And then when they develop, when they sit together, and the physicians have the problem and they have the access to data, right? And the tech people bring their own one is the entrepreneurship spirit, because you need to be fully dedicated. Physicians, when they practice medicine, they cannot really create a new company within the hospital. I mean, you can do it, but it's difficult. If you practice medicine, you don't have the time, or you can have part of the time. So we bring the entrepreneurs that have the tech background, and together they can really establish a company, like a new thing that will evolve into a company. Not all the initiatives matured to become companies. I mean, that's not an easy thing to develop, like a real product that you can sell later on, especially in AI. Many times it's difficult to get an IP on an algorithm, right? So it's not like a medical device. With medical device, it's totally different from using software, from doing software. But from my opinion, the best way is really to create these communities, like meetups or meetings of clinicians with problems and tech people that can come and try to solve them. Yeah,
You know,
we did a lot of
as
hackathons and stuff.
as products are developed, in my mind, ensuring that they can be trusted, that there's confidence in the tools that they're working is so important. That there's an ethical framework around how they get deployed that's not harming patients. But a key piece of all of this is validation and bias, and making sure that they work in populations. And there are example after example after example of algorithms that were biased that caused harm. Medical devices, they're not calibrated to work for all patients. How do you think about heading off some of those problems? Because it can be very challenging, right, to do validation in large, diverse populations, particularly when you're thinking about tools that may be developed in one center in one country, but have global reach pretty quickly as things are used and deployed. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, we spoke a little bit about it before. So like I said, you can develop initially in your own healthcare organization. Once you want really to use it, it has to go through a process of validation in the right way. We tried at that time to write a white paper about it. It's not easy. It's not easy, but from my opinion, without FDA, I will not use an algorithm. I will not use an AI without really making sure that I'm totally within the limits of what I'm allowed. You need to have a good tech company that you can trust, that can always check for biases, for drifting. A algorithm can drift away from what you started with. And the bias really depends on the database that you use. There are many rules, small rules that for transparency. I mean, think about it as a physician. You will not use something that you don't know where it comes back on, when the black box is too alarming for you. I mean, you want to know what type of data they use. So all these features, or all these issues that actually characterize the use of AI need to be answered before you start using it for population, like not just one by one. And like I said, always have a physician in the loop, always have somebody that goes through that and make sure that the answers are good. We all use ChatGPT, and we see how many things wrong answers can be given, right? But it shouldn't be, it looks like as if it's too much work in order to keep using of technology. On the other hand, first of all, it's fascinating. And second, it does save time, and it can save us to do things that we don't like to do so much. We like to think, about differential diagnosis. We like the interaction with patients. The technology can help us to do many admin issues that we don't like to do, and so on.
I think what you're illustrating very clearly, Dr. Bloch, and shared among all of us here in the panel, and I think within the audience, is the one thing that physicians and clinicians bring, which is that patient-centeredness, that, that advocacy for patients, for what we do and what we know when we see a patient firsthand, one-on-one, what we can do in that, translating that into technology. And that's something I feel is lacking when a physician or clinician is not present in that sort of aspect. And we have one of the questions that were sent beforehand. How can AI applications promote a patient-centered approach to healthcare? What do you think?
Yeah. So, of course, patient-centered, first of all, I mean, once the physicians have more time, like the admin stuff is done differently and they have more time to interact with patient, then it's definitely different. And that's what we really want it to be. Um, with the AI technologies, you can actually transcribe a conversation, like you can get even all the symptom checkers before the patient comes in, and the physician can really have a very nice summary of what the patient comes in and just have the time to understand a little bit, to go a little bit deeper with the patient itself of what the problem is. So all the ambient technology, AI based, can be used and really focus the care on the patient. You can transcribe and summarize all the information and other recommendation in a way that the physician won't have to do it, and will save him documentation time. Can you imagine? We spend so much time on documentation. This can be done easily using AI and Gen AI. The personalized medicine, like what does it mean that I need actually to think about, if this is a specific patient with those problems, AI can easily help us to understand what are the things that this patient specifically needs in comparison to other patients. So there are many, many ways that the AI can really give us a way to be more focused on the patient, and it's patient-centric.
Dr. Bloch, let me ask you, I think there's a lot of conversation about autonomous systems, assistive systems, and the concept of whether or not you need a human in the loop in various processes. Would love your perspective on how to think about that issue about autonomous, independent, freely operating AI systems, digital health, versus assistive, augmentative approaches that support clinicians, where there's a human in the loop who can supervise and oversee. You've seen lots of companies, lots of approaches. I'm curious how you think about that framework when it comes to healthcare and the use of AI.
Yeah, I think that it's clear what I'm going to answer. Yeah, I'm so afraid from bringing technology without having the physicians really actually directing how it should enter. I don't mean it in a way that will block bringing in technologies to healthcare, right? You see already what I've been doing in my life. Like, this is what I do. I love it and I believe in it, but I don't believe that we can implement technologies in healthcare without really directing this the right way. It can be even scary and not ethical, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I'll put a piece in the chat that I wrote last week. The title is "AI Won't Replace Doctors; It Will Upgrade Them." I co-wrote it with someone who you probably know, Elad Wallach, I'm sure, really talking about some of those foundational issues. And we wrote it in response to a comment that Bill Gates made, that AI systems and robots will replace physicians. And I could not disagree more with that. And I think we've made that point today.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a similar point. Just yesterday, it was posted on, I'm not going to name the name, but a very prominent person who operates one of the largest social media platforms said robots will take over surgery in the next 5 years. So we're talking, and these are things that, have been on our mind quite often. And within the clinician, the number one question I get asked when I'm interacting with fellow healthcare professionals is, are we going to be replaced? What are these tools going to be part of? And I think we're almost coming to the end of the discussion part, and there are a few
Good question.
questions here.
Yeah.
But when we're developing these tools, and this is one of the questions that came up that was sent like before the session, who's liable? Do you think the AI will increase medical litigations when you're developing these tools, Dr. Bloch? Who is responsible in the event that something goes wrong?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it can do definitely both. I mean, it can reduce lawsuits because sometimes you will have more precise answers. You eliminate. Just think about when the example that I gave with the radiology, if the physician is tired and is in the middle of a very hectic shift, it's easy for us to miss something, right? And the AI can be more precise from us. So even somebody mentioned, do we really need to look at all the chest x-rays that are done? But if we have, this is one of the projects that I did at Shiva, I put an AI that recognized a lung nodule in all the chest x-rays that went through the ER over the years, because there were at least 2 lawsuits a year for a missing lung nodule in the hospital, and that developed into lung cancer. So putting this type of technologies can definitely reduce lawsuits and help. On the other hand, if we need to be careful that physicians will not lose really the ability and the need to overview and to oversight what's going on, because the machines can make mistakes. Like I said, it can be biased, it can create bias, it can drift the algorithm from what it started to what it is now. So who is responsible? Definitely the physicians are responsible. So they cannot really let the AI do everything and stay aside and don't intervene. They need to be in the loop. They need to see what's going on. So I do think that we need to be careful. I think that it can reduce lawsuits that are there because we overlooked, and we were too tired, and we didn't do things correctly. But on the other hand, it can create new type of lawsuits. So
I always think to myself, if I'm going to use or release a tool, would I use this AI tool or digital health tool for a family member? And if the answer for me is no, then it's not ready. I'm not going to deploy it. We have a question from Iqbal from the Indonesian Medical Association. And he asks, how does multidisciplinary collaboration between doctors, engineers, and data scientists influence the outcomes of medical AI systems?
Well, I love it. I love the question. As I said, those multidisciplinary collaboration teams are really like the key. One of the things that it was after my time, so I'm not responsible for that. That was developed is really that the cardiologist brought data scientists and engineers and developed an AI tool to diagnose abnormal echoes. So started with valvular diseases, but also EF and heart failure issues. And it's working beautifully because, you have the clinical input, you have the data from the hospital, and you have the data scientists and engineers to develop it. It's working now. It's like it's been implemented in many hospitals, and they're outside, and it's a real company. That's the way to develop new technologies that we can use, for my opinion.
We had a question submitted in advance that's
Yeah.
asking about red flags. So if a startup, a company is approaching your practice, your system with a technology that they'd like to do a pilot or deployment or implement a solution, what are the kinds of things that you might suggest should make someone pause as they're asking a company about their potential for engagement?
Pause, you mean that I will?
Maybe there should be concern, a red flag or something that would otherwise be concerning.
Yeah. So the way I did things at Shiva is that I always brought the specialist. So if the company is in the dermatology or psychiatry, whatever, I brought my champion from those domains, and my data scientist, data engineer, and the IT person that is responsible for actually integrating. And we looked at the technology. I really developed like a scoring system, how to score this type of technologies from all those aspects that I mentioned. Red flags can be, you know, if it's almost impossible by the IT really to integrate it for some reason. I mean, you know, or it can be when a clinician said, I will never trust this type of technology to make diagnosis for some reason, right? I mean, so I will always bring the experts domains from each field that needs to be involved in integrating technology. And the way I did is I did always a pilot before integration. So there was always a course of pilot. And if the pilot is successful, yes, we kept going with integration.
We have a number of two other questions that have come in, and we're approaching the end, but would love to like at least try to answer them, even if it's a very quickly, Dr. Bloch. Savita Krishnaswamy asks, are programs like Python used in health data analysis? What are the common tech programs then used? And she further asks the question, can AI perform the tasks of a PA as a physician assistant?
Yeah. You know, I'm not a technologist, but I know that we use Python, of course. They use our language too. In the AI, in the machine learning, they use algorithms, right, that already exist, and they just tweaks it and use specific features. Physician assistant, yes. I mean, physician assistant, you know, it's really like a physician in some ways. In some hospitals, they work like physicians, but AI can do all the intake, right? I mean, when you think about it, and you know, you're going to see now a complicated patient. We physicians try to go over all the medical record. This can be done by an AI technology. All the data will come in. They will organize it in your notes in a way that is already ready for you when you come. This is like a work that the physician assistant can do. And all you will need to do is really to examine the question, to ask the questions that you really still need to get answers to, and conclude. So definitely. The next question that I see is, how do you think that education of healthcare professionals should evolve to ensure patient-centered healthcare in this digital era? You know, when I was in Boston in Harvard, we had medical students in our hospital, and it was not about technology, the education, the medical education. For some reason, I don't know why, but it was not about technology. I think that it's a complicated thing, but a fascinating one. And I always say that when I will retire, I will go to medical education. This will be my last stop before I retire, before I totally finish my career. It's important, and the idea is really not to give the tools to the medical students of how to look at technologies, how to evaluate them, to be smart in looking at them. And we won't be able to teach all type of technologies because the world changes so fast. I'm not able to keep up with every moment with everything that is going on. But once you educate the students to be curious, to ask the right questions, to know where to look for answers, to get the right advisors when you need them, then I think that we will be good off.
Oh, if we could just have as we're coming to the close of the webinar, Clarice or Marie, if you could put the link for the feedback, we'd love to hear back from you about this webinar, the series, any questions you might have, anything that might be further doubts. So before we close, are there any closing remarks from you, Dr. Bloch, Jesse, before we conclude the session?
I can say that I feel lucky that I'm in this profession, that I chose it many years ago. It's fascinating to be today, to see what's going on, to evolve our profession, to see what's coming next to us. we shouldn't be afraid from the technologies. We shouldn't be afraid that it will replace us. Even if some people will lose one side of their job, they will gain something else, because we do need professional people to get, to know different types of skills than they used to. So I'm very optimistic, and I want just to emphasize that we need to be careful and always to understand that we need to stay in the loop of looking at technologies, but not to be afraid from that.
Well, I'll just say thank you, Dr. Bloch, and Jacob, I'll let you close us out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Bloch. Thank you again, Jesse, for this best practices in medical AI development. To the audience, I hope this session gave you a practical lens in how we move from a clinical pain point to a deployment, and just how important your insight as clinicians is important in every step of the way. I think if there's one thing we should take away is AI in medicine is not something that's being done to you as a clinician. It's something that must be built with you. Your expertise, your caution, your vision are for better patient care. They're all critical. So thank you so much, Dr. Bloch, Dr. Jesse, the team, Clarice, Michelle, Magda, Marie, and the WMA working group secretariat. So our journey isn't over. On May 22nd, we'll be having our next and final of this pilot series. We're very happy to say that this will be continuing beyond even May. We'll give you more information about that. We'll be joined by Professor Mary Ann Hartley. She's an MD, PhD, public health leader at the intersection of computer science and humanitarian healthcare. So we'll be talking about global health and equity in this AI era, especially. So looking forward to all of you joining us for that session. Thank you once again for everyone, and warmly invite you for next week. Please fill in the form. Thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Bloch, and thank you, everyone. See you next month.